we want to welcome Professor Joseph Cheer, who's we are very delighted to have him here. Yeah, because he will talk something about the in relation to our conference in June, yeah, in Bali. So before we introduce what's the conference later on, we want to talk about what is this webinar for. So in this webinar, Professor Joseph Cheer will outline the wider trends in wellness and sustainable tourism research and expand how the two topics are intricately associated. Yeah, because this is in relation to the conference theme, which is wellness and sustainability tourism in paradise. So the growth in wellness tourism can be seen in consumer shift toward the spiritual, religious, and well-being, as opposed to the drive for sun, scent, and sea in decades gone by. So this has considerable implication for destinations planner and managers, as well as industry practitioners who are striving to keep pace with such transformations. The two-pronged focus will be taken, including industry trends and research trends. In drawing on both research and practice, this webinar aims to chart a future-oriented outlook on the opportunity and challenges ahead. So, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome Professor Cheer. But before we ask him to share his knowledge and experience, I would like to invite Dr. Maduri to introduce our esteemed speaker, Professor Cheer. Thank you.
Good afternoon to all and welcome Professor Dr. Cheer. I would be very happy to introduce Professor Dr. Joseph Cheer. He's a professor of sustainable tourism and heritage and associate dean International School of Social Sciences, Western Sydney University, Australia, and a visiting professor at the Center for Tourism Research, Wakayama University, Japan. In 2023, Joseph was listed in the top 2% of researchers in sport, leisure and tourism field. He is a co-editor-in-chief of Tourism Geographies, co-chair of the World Economic Forum, Global Future Council on the Future of Sustainable Tourism, and co-chair of the American Association of Geographies, Recreation, Tourism and Sports Group, and newly elected chair of International Geographical Union Commission on Tourism, Leisure and Global Change. Joseph is a past board member of PATA, that is Pacific Asia Travel Association, and advisory board member UNWTO Best Tourism Villages Initiative, and an M-panel consultant to the Asian Development Bank, that is Pacific Private Sector Development Initiative, as well as holding adjunct professorship at Wakayama University. He holds adjunct role at Haiyan University, China, AUT, New Zealand, and the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. He has received research funding from JSPS, that is Japan Society for the Promotion of Sciences, the Australian Research Council, ACR, Tourism Research Australia, Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Australia's Japan Foundation, and Australia-China Council, among others. Professor Joseph has published 12 books and over 70 book chapters and journal articles and non-traditional publications for the Conservation, World Economic Forum, UNESCO, Asian Development Bank, and Global Research Institute, among others. Professor Joseph is regularly quoted or invited to provide commentary to mainstream media, including recently in Asia, Nikkei, The Guardian, ABC Australia, CBS, BBC World, TTCV China, CNBC Channel News Asia, Yahoo News, and Radio New Zealand, among others. So we welcome you all. We welcome Professor Joseph Cheer for this webinar, and we are quite delighted to read your biodata. This is rather not a brief, but a very important and a very elaborative biodata, and we can see your efforts you have taken through your academic career. So with this, I request you to please commence your keynote speech.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, everyone. I see lots of familiar faces. I see Desmond. Desmond, sorry I didn't make it to Germany for the conference last time. Yankee and Januszka, who's in Groningen. I think you asked where she was from, Yankee. She's from Groningen, but I'm not saying it properly. It's in the Netherlands. But anyway, to all of you, it's interesting that at times like these, there's lots of cross-cutting pathways. I see Birgit here. I've not met Birgit, but I know she's from Melbourne, which is not too far away from where I am in Sydney. So, and Nirmala Ranasinghe Sensei, who's in Nara in Japan. So nice to meet you all. I feel like I'm amongst a group of friends. I thank you, Yankee, and the board of the Euro-Asia Tourism Studies Association for the invitation to do this. And I think it's really, if I recall correctly, the call for papers deadline is today, right? Or is it tomorrow? I think it's tomorrow, but usually
today as of Indonesian time, but we will extend it until next month.
Yeah, I thought so. I thought it's good timing. Usually call for papers have at least 1 or 2 weeks extension. So hopefully by the end of this, everyone will be raring to come to Bali, right? And using the conference as any excuse. So the topic wellness and sustainability tourism in paradise is a really good juxtaposition of wellness in paradise. And very often in much of the research that we do, not just in wellness tourism, but in sustainability tourism sustainability, is the question of, you know, who are the beneficiaries and who bears the cost of all of this. So I guess in a way I will try and entertain some of those ideas, but I must say that this takes me back to 2020, because in 2020 the association had a conference, but it was totally online. And I think I was also invited to have a chat at that conference. Back in those dark old days, right? It seems like such a long time ago now, but it's a good reference point, because when we talk about wellness and wellness tourism, I think in many ways, you know, that really gave a boost to wellness tourism and considerations around wellness tourism when we were all faced with this pandemic and the inability to move. Wellness became something that at the forefront of our minds generally. And now when it comes to tourism, indeed it is at the forefront of traveler motivations as well. So let me, I have a deck of slides that I'd like to share. And as I understand, this is not meant to be a lecture as such, but more of a discursive presentation about research and practice regarding wellness and sustainability tourism. So let me get onto that, because I have quite a number of slides now. Yankee, tell me if my slides are not being seen. You can see the slides now?
Yes,
We can see.
just
Okay.
make it the slideshow. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so that's good now?
Yes.
All right. So in trying to think about I guess the difference between how we think about wellness and sustainability in tourism in research and in practice, I think is particularly important. As I understand, this conference is not just for scholars, but it's also for policymakers and industry people. And more importantly, for us as scholars, it's important that we're not just talking to other scholars about these issues, but we are also inviting the participation of our colleagues who actually do this work, who practice wellness and sustainability tourism. And so with that in mind, I prepared the presentation in that regard. So forgive me if it's not rich enough in theory, but I thought I would limit the theory and focus more on the practicalities in the everyday of wellness and sustainability tourism. I use that image, an image of tourists in Byron Bay, because when we typically, Byron Bay is north of Sydney, where I am at the moment. A wellness haven is what it was known for in its early days, but it's now become a luxury tourism destination. And usually we see destinations evolve and change over time. This photograph suggests that wellness is about yoga, and usually when we think about wellness tourism, this is one of the first words that come up when we did some research asking people the question, when you think about wellness tourism, what do you think of? Yoga inevitably comes up in the first few responses. So I thought we could start with that kind of imagery in mind. But more importantly, one of the reasons why we find wellness becoming this enormous topic, not just in tourism, but more generally in everyday life, is, as I said, the reference point of the pandemic, but also more broadly, consumer trends in terms of longevity, in terms of health and wellness, in terms of beauty and those kinds of things, has meant that wellness has become what McKinsey and Co., the consulting company, refer to as a $1.8 trillion global wellness market in 2024. Now, of course, if you scour the internet and you read lots of reports, you will see there are wild estimates about how much the wellness industry is worth globally, right? But I think that 1.8 trillion is probably an underestimate of wellness generally. But of course, it's important to think about wellness, not just in tourism terms, because wellness, tourism is a subset of the broader wellness discussion. So that $1.8 trillion is not related to wellness tourism only, but wellness more broadly. Skift, the travel analysts, in their focus on tourism, estimated that wellness tourism is worth $1.4 trillion by 2020, should be worth that much by 2027. Of course, whether that is the case or not depends on how we define wellness tourism, and I will get to that later in the talk. So you can see wellness tourism is indeed a serious business. And it becomes even more serious for tourism when we see this push by destinations for quality tourists. Every destination we can think of says, we want quality tourists. In other words, those who stay a long time, those who spend a lot of money, and those who are very benign on the local community and the environments they visit. But of course, not all destinations are capable of taking care of those high-end tourists. We see Bali doing just this, where the conference will be. Bali making deliberate announcements that it wants high-quality tourists. It doesn't want the backpackers or the young Australians who make a nuisance of themselves in Kuta and other places like that. And so, at the end of the day, there is a threshold where not every destination around the world can cater for so-called quality tourists. So with that in mind, the purpose of this talk was to bridge the two concepts, if you like, of wellness and wellness tourism itself, with the two conflated together. But when we talk about wellness, wellness is a lot of things beyond just about tourism, right? And that's an important point to make, because if we look at the wider literature, we see this. So for example, in my work on wellness and well-being and what's referred to as human flourishing, which I will talk about later, we talk about therapeutic landscapes. In other words, how landscapes therapeutic actions are associated together. Now, others will talk about things like gastronomy as part of this therapeutic landscape, as well as a range of other things. So it's important when we talk about wellness, we're talking about a range of different things. And in this case, wellness as cultural practice is one that we will see very often. If you dig deep in the research and the practice, you will see that many things that we see as tourism scholars and consider as being wellness are cultural practices in the everyday of the people in which these practices belong. If we talk about, and I will talk about ayahuasca tourism later, ayahuasca tourism is part of a cultural practice of communities in countries in Latin America, Peru and Colombia and other places like that. If we talk about yoga in India, as an example of this cultural practice. And all of these cultural practices become commodified through wellness tourism. When we talk about wellness, we also talk about wellness as serious leisure. By that I mean, for example, we might consider surfing as part of this wellness tourism concept that we are shaping, but it's also part of serious leisure. And serious leisure, in a theoretical sense, is based around leisure that people participate in not only for fun, but more as part of an identity and as a lifestyle as well. So wellness as cultural practice towards wellness as serious leisure is a way of looking at this. And I guess as delegates come to the conference in June, there are many different ways to look at wellness, and I hope to be able to kind of decipher some of those. Wellness as preventative health is very obvious, right? In many countries in Southeast Asia, we see Westerners from Australia, from the UK, from America, moving to Southeast Asia for preventative health, but also because of the relative cost advantages of being in a place like Southeast Asia. So wellness is preventative health might not have anything necessarily to do with tourism directly, but if we have foreigners going to a destination to engage in preventative health, to some degree they are tourists. So this is where tourism intersects with a lot of these wellness travel modes. Wellness is lifestyle. You know, if we go back to the analogy that I used earlier, or the example, surfing. If I surf just fun and leisure and not necessarily see it as part of my identity, then perhaps wellness as lifestyle is something else we can entertain. Wellness as indulgence. Now, wellness as indulgence is something that is quite common in the context in which I live in Australia, because when we speak of wellness, issues of equity and affordability and other things like that are raised, right? And one of my colleagues referred to it as the Lululemon effect, right? If anybody's ever tried to buy Lululemon merchandise, you will see that Lululemon is not exactly the cheapest yoga gear to buy, right? So we talk about wellness as indulgence because very often those who can afford to have those wellness experiences are not necessarily those at the bottom end of the socioeconomic demographic. Then we talk about wellness as luxury, which is the other one. One of the developments in the wake of the pandemic was this shift to luxury, and researchers in luxury travel. And my colleague who was on the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council, who is the chairman of Six Senses Resorts, talks about wellness as luxury, right? And very often when we speak of wellness, we also need to consider the social framing of wellness. Who is it for? Who benefits from wellness? Who provides wellness? And the juxtaposition couldn't be any more stark when you go to somewhere like Bali, where you have wealthy foreigners having wellness experiences in a place where the relative differences between what they pay and what the masseuse or the yoga instructor is actually getting paid. So we see these questions of equity in wellness as a topic. Wellness as spirituality is another one. Januszka Schmidt, who's here, has recently published a paper on spirituality and Kyoto, and when we talk about wellness, it's inevitable that motivation for tourists to engage in spiritual experiences inevitably includes some wellness experiences. So if we had a spectrum of what wellness involves, it involves a whole range of activities, as I said from the very beginning, from wellness as everyday cultural practice to here wellness as spirituality. Wellness as medicine. I think this is relatively commonplace in many destinations, where people travel to a place or go to a place to live as a result of the medical imperatives that they are hoping to benefit from. Medical tourism is one example, and we you know, as I said once again, people going to countries where you know, many Australians are now going to places like Thailand and Malaysia to get dental treatment and other kinds of treatments because it's much cheaper there. So we see this going on, the geoeconomics of things, the mobilities, the cross-border movements. So wellness invites a lot of these different dynamics to take place. Wellness and retirement. And once again, we see many people retiring to places that are more relaxing and more affordable for them to live in, right? And we see this very much in countries like Malaysia as an example, where there is a definite government imperative to attract people to come and live in Malaysia and to not only spend the rest of their twilight years there, but to do so because of the wellness advantages that they are likely to encounter. Wellness and geo-arbitrages, I've referenced this already, where people, from some countries go to other countries to access wellness because of the cost differentials. If I were to say compare, a Thai massage in Australia might cost $150, while in Thailand it might be, I don't know, a fraction of that, right? So we see this kind of thing going on. And the question about who are the wellness tourists is a very important question, because usually the wellness tourists are from the global north going to the global south. How many times would you, perhaps this is an observation we can make in Bali. If you go into a spa or a yoga retreat or something like that, how many Balinese people will you actually see there is a really interesting observation to make. I did that with some of my students when we were there, probably before COVID. And it was a really interesting and eye-opening exercise, because the question of who wellness is for, who wellness tourism is for, becomes very clear. And so in terms of that practice, we then think about the research context, and there's a ton of research on wellness. Wellness is not by any means a new concept. Wellness tourism is not a new concept, right? We see these are some of the seminal books that have come out on wellness tourism, and they're over a decade old now. Cornelia Voigt and Christoph For's book, Wellness Tourism, was probably one of the first to kind of grapple with how destinations deal with wellness. And to some degree, we see this wellness washing that happens in a lot of tourism advertising, as akin to greenwashing for environmental benefit. We see a lot of wellness washing that goes on. And I always love that, and well, I don't love exactly, but I always smirk at the contradiction when they talk about wellness and well-being on one hand, right alongside poverty and disadvantage on the other. And perhaps, I'm not the best, I wouldn't be the best wellness client, because I couldn't lie there enjoying my massage if I know that, 500 meters away there is a village and they don't have any electricity or anything there. So these kinds of issues, I think, are important for us to discuss at a conference about wellness and sustainability. But also wellness and hospitality is something that we need to take into account, because they're intertwined. But let's just assume that all comes under wellness tourism. This Malcolm Cooper and Patricia Cooper. Malcolm was a professor in Japan, and he writes about spas and hot springs tourism and that link to health and wellness tourism. Of course, we know that spas and hot springs are not just a Japanese phenomenon. They're a European phenomenon, they're an Asian phenomenon, Southeast Asia. But when we think about health and wellness tourism, it's the epitome, right, of what we talk about. If you're traveling to Iceland or Finland, or Japan or China, or even New Zealand to Rotorua, where there are hot springs, we see health and wellness inevitably intertwined into spas and hot springs. And then we see in the mainstream travel magazine world, right? I don't know anyone who buys travel magazines these days, apart from when they go to a hotel, right? They read them, or if they're on a plane. But Travel and Spa is a magazine that's specifically shaped around wellness tourism. And if you flick through Travel and Spa as a magazine, what I said before about wellness and luxury, wellness and indulgence, really is foregrounded. And in my own work, if I can just draw an example, and for all of you in your own work, you might think about this. How does wellness fit into the work that you do? It may be obvious, or it may be not so obvious. For example, in my work that we've done on host communities and pilgrimage tourism, largely in Asia, we see that one of the motivations for people to go on a pilgrimage is self-discovery, self-development. And if we put that around, if we put a big umbrella around it, it's really about wellness, well-being, personal development are intertwined in this. In the Handbook of Niche Tourism, there were several examples of wellness tourism, from yoga tourism to ayahuasca tourism, to surf tourism and other things like that. But there is an argument made now that wellness is not so much a niche anymore. Wellness is actually mainstream. You know, it's not something that only a small number of people do. Now it's become very much mainstream. So the mainstreaming of wellness is another interesting area of research that some colleagues are doing. When it comes to over-tourism, as an example, right? If we talk about wellness, we can't confine wellness only to wellness to the tourists. What about wellness and well-being for the hosts? And I think this is an important juxtaposition in the wellness tourism study. We often just focus on the tourists, the demand side. But what about the supply side? Who does wellness, you know, is there an exclusivity for who wellness should apply to? And well, of course, in our recent book on religious tourism, religion, spirituality as drivers for travel are inevitably intertwined into wellness and well-being. So that's the really quick run through to some of the theoretical positioning around wellness and sustainable tourism. But what about the practice context? So what I wanted to do was throw a blanket around what is happening in wellness tourism around the globe. Right here we see once again Forbes publication, not for the mainstream, but more for the upwardly mobile, looking at global wellness as global wellness tourism, valued at $1 trillion in 2025, this year. So we see, once again, all of these wild estimates, these different terminologies. They refer to this as global wellness tourism. And so for us as scholars, when we try to come to grips with something, we're trying to categorize things and put it in a neat box. It's really difficult. So perhaps there's an opportunity for us to do that. McKinsey and Company, who is doing a lot of work in tourism now, defines and values it at $1.8 trillion dollars. But when they talk about wellness, they're not just talking about wellness tourism. They will talk about wellness tourism as a consumer movement, as a broader consumer movement around products and services, and not just things like travel. Here they define or they measure wellness under 6 different categories, which I must say are not exclusive categories in a sense. You know, wellness in terms of your appearance, wellness. You know, we see the drive for people. I saw an article about people men going to Turkey for hair transplants. Apparently, Turkey has the market-leading technology on hair transplants. And if you sat at Istanbul airport and waited for your plane home, wherever you're going, you will see lots of evidence of that. So wellness in terms of appearance is something that they consider to be part of this wellness industry. Health, obviously, in terms of medications and personal products, fitness, nutrition, sleep, and mindfulness. And it's interesting that they don't even include travel in this, which I think is a notable omission. And perhaps, you know, I don't know what their definition is based around, but it's a notable omission from our eyes anyway. And also, when we talk about wellness, there's an increasing consumer demand for efficacy and scientific credibility about the claims that are made about wellness, right? But in wellness tourism, as I said before, the term wellness washing is very evident. You will see it everywhere. And how do we know? How do we measure the wellness benefits of, you know, 2 weeks at a yoga retreat in Ubud in Bali? We don't know that. So, and that's the gray areas that wellness tourism inhabits. So here they talk about the research was done in the US, the UK, and in China, and you can see that for the most part, there is a driving need for consumers to want to understand the efficacy and scientific credibility of the wellness products and services that they are consuming. And this is some broad data. They assess that 70% of consumers in the UK and the United States and 85% in China indicated that they have purchased more in this category in the past year than in prior years. So wellness and all of the things that they refer to as wellness, appearance, health, fitness, nutrition, sleep, and other things, come under their ambit of what they consider to be wellness. Here, when they talk about US consumers, going to a gym is a core part of this, the fitness routine of the average American, right? So you can see that 70% of Americans say that going to the gym is an important investment in their health and personal appearance. So we see this, right? And it's no doubt that this extends to the motivations for travel. When people travel, they want to ensure that these matters, health and personal appearance, exercise, is embedded in the travel experience that they will go on. So that brings us to, how do we then understand the differences between, or how do we define wellness tourism as a concept? The Global Wellness Institute, probably one of the leading research hubs for wellness knowledge, sees this kind of bifurcation here between medical tourism and wellness tourism as the best description as to what we can mean by wellness tourism. If you look on my left and probably your left too, under medical tourism, they say that it's travel to receive treatment for a diagnosed disease, and so on and so on. As opposed to wellness tourism, where it's travel to maintain, manage, or improve. So we see it's almost like two ends of the health and wellness spectrum. One where we are trying to fix something that has been breached or worsened, and the other where it's about maintaining, managing, or improving. In terms of the desire for medical tourism, it's the desire for lower cost of care, low cost of care, high quality care. In a country like Australia, for example, many Australians are ditching health insurance, and instead of getting treatment in Australia, are self-insuring and going to a place like Malaysia to have their medical tourism experience, if you can call it that. So while the motivation is for low cost care and high quality, lower cost of care and higher quality, for wellness tourism, the motivation is for healthy living, disease prevention, stress reduction. It's almost like wellness tourism aligns with the maxim that prevention is better than cure, kind of thing, right? And we see this in a lot of the wellness washing that we see in tourism. And so, so as a very kind of broad way to distinguish between medical tourism and wellness tourism, this is what we see. And usually medical tourism is conflated with wellness tourism. And then we see around the globe the push for a better understanding. This Wellness Tourism Summit was in Australia. I think it was in, I think it might have been 2023, I think it was. The first Wellness Tourism Summit, which was a privately driven initiative, which attracted a whole lot of not just tourism providers in this, but a whole raft of different industries that provide services to the sector. And then there were further events in South Australia there as well. And the founder of the Wellness Tourism Summit, Catherine Drogo, said that wellness travel is no longer seen as niche. Wellness experiences are being demanded by consumers worldwide. And we see this. This is no exaggeration. But like most disciplinary research, the research lags the practice. And I think we will see some of the research identifying these kinds of things in time to come. But then we see wellness, hospitality, travel, and wellness converging to redefine global tourism, and we see this in high-end tourist experiences mainly. I don't think you will, if you went to a youth hostel, the considerations around wellness are necessarily part of the offer, right? It's more at the very high end. We see this, this idea that there's a wellness tourism revolution when it was there all along. It's just that COVID and it's related rather to this idea of a last chance tourism, and we see this in Generation Y and Z, where there's a consumerism based upon, if we don't do it now, we might not have we might not have the chance to do that again. So as a result, the premium that wellness tourism can gather is realized. In Bali, where we're going to meet in June, this idea of wellness tourism is embraced quite wholly by policymakers. And I understand, Yankee, you might know more than me, but the Bali International Hospital is considered to be one of a launching pad to position Bali as a medical tourism hub in the region, right? And these kinds of conversations often raise conflicting thoughts in my mind, because I'm thinking to myself, so what does this mean for the provision of medical services for the local people? Does this mean there is a, you know, a conflict of ethics or interest here? I don't know. That's something that some colleagues are looking into. The ethics of medical tourism in the global south is a sticky subject. And we see this, as the preventative element of wellness tourism. A hot bath every day keeps doctors away, and this is particularly true. I know one of the things I miss about living in Japan is the ability to have an onsen, sit in an onsen every day. And I don't know if it's my imagination, but I can say my health was much better when I was doing that than when I'm not doing that now, right, in Australia. And this idea that onsens and the everyday practice, remember I talked about wellness as everyday cultural practice, how this suggestion that because, Japanese people live longer than other people, largely because of this association with mineral hot springs or thermal hot springs. There's some evidence for that emerging. Is it an exaggeration? It's much difficult to know, but I would rather think that longevity is related to a range of different things and not just having a bath every day. It's probably related to diet, lifestyle, stress, genes and other things like that. And then we see the tourism industry leaping on these kinds of everyday cultural practices to create products and experiences. The Japanese National Tourist Office has seen this as a competitive advantage of Japan. Its hot springs tourism product is legendary. So as a result, we see this idea. Post-pandemic, ritual and hot springs offer rejuvenation and luxury. So this connection, in Japan, the access to baths and onsen is almost universal. It's quite cheap. In some places it's about 500 yen, which is about $5 up to 10 Australian dollars. But here we see in many places in rural Japan where populations are dwindling, where the Hoshino Resorts, one of the luxury resort companies, is developing these wellness resort style things and taking onsen and the daily bathing ritual to a premium level. So this is why I talked about wellness. Who exactly are we talking about when we talk about the beneficiaries of wellness tourism? And then we also see, in this case, Taiwan has many thermal hot springs as well. And as part of their tourism offering, Taiwan is now stepping up and saying, hey, we're also a hot spring or onsen destination. So we see this happening more and more, where there is a recognition that to attract quality tourists, the kind that every destination wants, wellness tourism provides a good pathway for that to happen. And this idea of wellness being on the bucket list, right, is something that we see more and more, because it's not just the Instagrammable moments that people are valuing, but also the genuine wellness experiences that they can get. Another one, I don't know why Japan seems to be the exemplar for wellness tourism, but the idea of forest bathing, I don't think it's only a Japanese concept, but it's popularized through Japan, where spending time in a forest and is now seen to have stress relief connotations, anti-cancer connotations, and we see in some countries now, rather than prescribing antidepressants or medical interventions, many medical practitioners are saying, go and spend 2 weeks in a forest somewhere or something related to that. Go and spend 2 weeks in nature. Nature as a prescription is becoming more and more important. And that's related to wellness too. And once again, we see this kind of upscaling, upmarketing of wellness, executives embracing the powerful benefits of wellness tourism. So, these kinds of cultural practices that were available to just about anyone in the countries that they come from are now, if we take it out of that context, becomes a premium experience. And we see countries now embracing this wellness idea. In Greece, the Greek Tourism National Tourism Office recently launched a wellness tourism strategy. Once again, to attract those high-end travelers. We see here in Australia, a Big Red, a tourism company that runs a range of different tourism businesses, embraces wellness tourism and talks about a 200% increase in demand for it year on year. Now, this, when you think about those levels of increase, it's a serious level of increase, right? That demands attention. We see this in Germany. Germany has a long history of wellness tourism. Treatment's going to sit in a salt mine somewhere, going to have a bath and things like that. Perhaps Desmond, you do this. Germany has long had a reputation for wellness, but it hasn't necessarily been associated with tourism as such, right? But now we will see, tourism loves these feel-good kind of experiences because it sells product, it sells experiences. We see in Australia, again, a repeat of what was the big red group said, this idea that Australians are embracing wellness tourism. And to some degree, it meshes with wider consumer movements, right? For example, we see the uptake of tobacco and alcohol is reducing as consumers, as a consumer movement. So perhaps we see the shift towards wellness taking place. We see the Philippines trying to do the same thing now as well. And when you think about it, I suspect every destination manager in a workshop is saying, okay, guys, what wellness traditions does our country have? And let's see if we can make tourism something out of it. You used to be able to get a Thai massage or a Hawaiian massage or a lomi lomi massage or something like that. Now, in some places in Australia, you can get a range of different types of Southeast Asian massages, which probably for all intents and purposes are the same thing, but it's coming into this kind of the way destinations are branding themselves. And in Australia, we see this interesting phenomenon in the Northern Territory where they are linking wellness tourism to Aboriginal cultural tourism, which has a very complex set of circumstances when you think of, if you're familiar with Australia's social kind of backdrop, this idea that, that Aboriginal cultural tourism and wellness transformation is something that can be achieved through tourism. Now, the social backdrop I refer to is, the social disadvantage of Aboriginal communities and people. And suddenly we're launching this wellness thing onto them to say, okay, to tourists, our Aboriginal brothers and sisters will be able to make you better, while in the midst of all of this, they have their own, challenges in mind. But we can see this is what the destination managers are doing, and I think it's probably a timely exercise. And they say here that they link nature and indigenous culture to wellness experiences. Wellness washing, I'm not so sure, but I remain open to that. And they ask the question, why do wellness transformation visitors seek unique Aboriginal cultural experiences, and how can their genuine nature quality be communicated to those travelers? It's rather problematic for a social scientist when you read something like that. For a marketer, it sounds like, hooray, we've got something new here. But for us as social scientists, you look at something like this, and there's something that is awkward about it, right? For example, the statement they make there, the wellness tourism sector has increasingly stated that many international wellness visitors were dissatisfied with so-called First Nation experiences around the world. They claim that several wellness visitors find such experiences contrived, unnatural, or staged. Hello, it's tourism, right? And so there we are. It's an interesting experiment, and so far I think it's still out to judgment. And then we see property developers now jumping on wellness as a way to sell apartments and property developments. This recent one by Cavalli, a property company, talking about how the global wellness industry is worth so much, and their developments are based around the wellness and well-being of residents who live in this place. So you've got your swimming pool, your spa, the whole thing. So wellness is seeping into every aspect of modern life, right? So wellness tourism, by virtue of that, is a necessary connection to all of this. And so we see these developments taking place at destination levels, in the property industry, across consumer goods. And I just wanted to talk about two very short examples that I'm looking into that are part of my focus on therapeutic landscapes. You know, when we think about wellness, we think about this generally. This is the vision we get. But wellness is much more than that. And for example, one of my research projects now is on onsen tourism. If anyone's been to an onsen or a thermal hot spring in Japan, those noren or curtains there signify the difference between male and female. You know, back in the old days, males and females used to bathe together. And then the Second World War came, and then I'm told that when the Americans came, they said, all right, men and women, you have to be separate. So now women and men bathe separately. But when we think about wellness of this type, and if we think about onsen tourism as an example, hot springs and the bathing facilities are built around these kind of institutions, if you like, local institutions, everyday cultural practice. Japan has a deeply rooted bathing culture, and it is commonly thought bathing gives your well-being a significant boost. The natural composition of the water varies from north to south, and depending on the area, the water quality differs. And so, as well as being a therapeutic and everyday practice, it's now become very much a tourism thing. But when we think about wellness, a lot of wellness is rooted in the heritage and culture of a place. This is an ukiyo-e illustration of an onsen scene back in the day in Japan, right? Where, you know, in Australia, I mean, this is probably a very bad example, but in Australia, the center of a town or might be the pub where people go to gossip and meet. But in Japan, back in the day, it was the hot spring where people met in the evening. And this just describes that just about every wellness tradition that the wellness tourism movement has taken up comes out of mobilizing some kind of cultural practice. And we see this, right? Wellness is not just about the activity you partake in. This is in Yamagata in Japan, in northern Japan. It's about the landscapes that we see before us. You know, these winter landscapes are archetypical of what we think about when we think about onsen tourism. You know, this idea that it's the activity of soaking in a bath, but around that are all of the other interconnected experiences from the landscape, the culture, the gastronomy, and so on. So when we think about wellness, we can only simplistically think about the acts, the wellness acts that we participate in, but it's much more than that. You know, landscapes, townscapes, culture, local culture, and this is in Kinoseki in further south, closer to Tokyo. And then we see this connection to hospitality, to ryokan tourism. You know, ryokans are country inns, and usually country inns, you know, have a hot spring next to it. So it's not just about the act of bathing, but it's also about the connection. The overall experience of onsen tourism is related to the bath as well as to the type of hospitality that is on offer in a particular place. And in this case, it's Japan. This is a typical ryokan that you will stay in overnight, and the onsen is outside, right? And it's also connected to hospitality. In Japan, Japanese hospitality is often described as omotenashi, a particular distinguishing way of looking after your guest that is distinctively Japanese. And then we see this connection to gastronomy. You know, this is washoku, the menu that one would have when you go to an onsen, you stay in the ryokan, and then this is the link to gastronomy. And most ryokans that I've done this research in, a lot of the produce that is part of your washoku here is locally produced. So if we talk about wellness and sustainability, these are the kinds of links. The localness of wellness tourism, I think, is a particularly important distinction. And then in your room, or perhaps the public public bath, we have these kinds of things. So once again, landscapes, culture, heritage, they play a big part in the what makes up the overall wellness tourism experience. You know, and this kind of, you know, in a sense, this is a daily cultural ritual that's become commodified as a special tourist experience, right? And you know, this typifies what we mean by wellness tourism in a Japanese context. And then we see this attraction of this to Japanese tourists. Interestingly, here everyone's wearing their swimmers. Usually in an onsen, you're supposed to be naked, and Westerners are often horrified when the mama-san comes up to them and says, "You need to take your clothes off. You can't wear your swimmers in there." So this must be a stage shot for Western tourists. And of course, it's not just about the humans, right? When it comes to wellness, this is a ubiquitous shot of Yamagata and other places in northern Japan, where the monkeys actually jump into the onsen as well. So when we think about wellness, I think being able to look at the broad diversity of wellness is really important. And when I say the links to well-being, some recent research drew a link between bathing in hot springs and Japanese gut microbiota. Now, you don't usually drink the onsen water, but they've been able to draw this comparison to say that, in some places you can drink the onsen water, but in most places you don't. This link between, gut microbiota and having a daily soak in a thermal hot spring. So that's one exemplar of wellness tourism. The other one I want to look at, because I acknowledge, because this is this Euro-Asia Tourism Studies Association, I wanted to look at a Asian exemplar and then a more European exemplar, although some people might say hammam is not exactly European. It's in that space, right? So hammam, which is I think as far as I understand, its heritage is Turkish. But we see, if you look at advertising for tourism to Morocco as an example, hammam tourism is a really big part of the Moroccan tourism offering. But as I understand, the literal meaning of hammam in Arabic is spreader of warmth, or Turkish baths, right? Is what a hammam is. Dates back to the early days of the Islamic Empire and so on and so on. So you can see that wellness is very much rooted in traditional cultures from a long time ago. It's not new. And they refer to Prophet Muhammad as part of this hammam culture. The hot room and all-round heating of the body is an important feature of the experience, and it's rooted in religion and this kind of sharing and social capital building of the hammam is similar to the onsen. So in this research I'm doing, I'm trying to compare the two, onsens and hammam tourism, and trying to find similar points of discussion. Once again, if we go back, there's a long heritage of hammam tourism. Roman baths is another example, but I won't talk about Roman baths so much. And we see this, how wellness has pervaded Turkish culture in this case for a very long time. And in the modern day, we see this is the modern hammam, right? In five-star hotels and uber luxury resorts. And just another exemplar of that. And then we see this, this kind of wellness. And some of my other colleagues are talking about wellness and the egalitarian nature of wellness. Who has access to wellness? My Turkish colleague says that in Turkey, going to a hammam is affordable. It's within reach of, the average person, not the five-star hotel hammam, but like in Japan, the local town onsen. And so, it inevitably becomes part of this tourist offer, where if you go to Turkey or Morocco, engaging in the hammam experience becomes part of this. I know in my case, when I went to Turkey for the first time around 2006, the first thing I wanted to do was go to hammam, and little did I know I would be bashed up and scraped and pulled by two very big burly men in the Turkish bath, right? But it was an experience that I wouldn't have had anywhere else. So we see this, this yearning for unique experiences that wellness tourism tries to seek out. Just another illustration of that. So we see something that is a local cultural practice suddenly morphing and moving over towards a tourist experience. And in between, we see this shift between the upmarketing of wellness and its access is becoming more questionable. This is another illustration of a couple having a Turkish bath together as part of that tourist experience. And so we see two types of experiences in Turkey, in Japan, and I wanted to draw on one more exemplar, ayahuasca tourism, as part of this wider wellness kind of pursuit. Ayahuasca the boom has moved into tourism as part of alternative therapies through travel experiences. And ayahuasca is, as it's described, a traditional plant-based medicine common among indigenous peoples in South America, especially in the Amazonian countries. And it's increasingly become very popular with young travelers. And it's, once again, as it shifts away from everyday local cultural practice to commodified tourist experiences, it raises lots of contestations and arguments about who is this serving now. And ayahuasca is a really interesting one because the risks are understated usually by tourist authorities. You know, an ayahuasca experience is something like this: visiting a shaman, drinking the concoction, and along with a number of other rituals as a way of enlightening oneself or addressing any mental and emotional, psychological issues. And we see this kind of thing becoming very popularized in Colombia and Peru, especially for tourist purposes. And it raises the ire of a lot of people who are traditionalists who say these kinds of practices are traditional for tribes people. And now we're starting to take this across as a commodified practice. You know, issues of commodification, authenticity, health and safety, tourist safety are increasingly raised. You know, the pursuit for spiritual and psychological well-being is intertwined in ayahuasca tourism. We have shamans, then commodifying what is usually a local cultural practice for tourists. And so this idea of alternative healing is part of this consumer trend, moving away from conventional medicine to alternative healing. And we see this kind of thing, you know, tourists going to these Amazonian countries to engage in ayahuasca tourism for this purpose. And then we see this shift taking place into other areas. This is really interesting. Some of my geography colleagues, feminist geographies, are researching this area. Psychedelic feminism through travel is a particularly interesting frontier for research. I haven't seen anyone advertising this as a tourist experience yet, but it won't be long. And then we see at the higher end, at the very, very upper end, this was in Travel and Leisure, one of the leading travel magazines, you know, how now ayahuasca retreats are being developed that are targeting the very, very high end of the travel market. So it's shifting, you know, we see this shifting away of these valuable cultural practices away from access for the everyman in the everyday towards more limited access. And so we see this becoming more and more common. People don't just want to travel, you know, the days of sun, sand, sea, and any other S's. Now they want spirituality and well-being and these kinds of experiences. So, you know, so it's raised a lot of criticism. And this is, if we are talking from a researcher point of view, if we just look at the demand side for this and we ignore the supply side and the impacts of this on sustainability, we're missing a big chunk of how this develops. So what are the implications then for us as researchers? I know I've gone over time already, Yankee. Please stop me if you need to. So I'll just rush just briefly through some research that's been done on wellness tourism. And we see that wellness tourism goes back a long way. As these authors say, in the middle of the 19th century, wellness destinations were well established in areas of thermal hot springs and other things like that. And the wellness traditions are very strong in European countries and in Britain as well. And slowly in medical anthropology, the term therapeutic landscapes emerged in the 1960s, suggesting that experiences of places can have a well-being and therapeutical impact on tourists. From a tourism literature point of view, they talk about three notable relevant streams that comprise health, wellness, and well-being, sustainability and impact on destinations and local communities, and tourist behavior. And this is a particularly important kind of trio of things to think about from a research point of view. Tourist behavior, the impact on destinations and communities, as well as wellness and well-being as a concept and experience. Furthermore, in the literature, they talk about this kind of haziness or confusion or inability to lock wellness tourism down to something that is universally understood. They talk about wellness tourism being referred to in other terms: health tourism, healthcare tourism, medical tourism, holistic tourism, well-being tourism, spa tourism, yoga tourism, surf tourism, and on it goes, right? Inevitably, they are all linked to offering a well-being benefit to some degree. Wellness tourism, according to Hudson and colleagues, is defined as a phenomenon to enhance personal well-being for those traveling to destinations which deliver services and experiences to rejuvenate the body, mind, and spirit. So it's very much centered around the tourist. Nothing to do with impacts, nothing to do with culture, heritage, equity, fairness, all of those kinds of things. I talk about human flourishing as an aspect of tourism impacts and wellness. When we talk about human flourishing, it goes back a long way in Greek philosophy, where they talk about happiness as a corollary to human flourishing, right? And well-being, wellness tourism are all interconnected to concerns about happiness, flourishing, and the like. In some work I did with a PhD student of mine on yoga tourism in Rishikesh, India. Now, Rishikesh is one of those places that yoga tourists, it's like I don't want to say it's the Mecca for yoga tourists, but it's somewhere where, you know, it's on the bucket list for serious yogis to want to go to, right? But in our research, we also wanted to look at other things. What was the impact on the local community? We looked at the impact on the environment, particularly water supplies. We looked at the impact on the availability of housing and other things like that, and what anthropologists refer to as the demonstration effect. In other words, the impact of having tourists in a rural village in India, and how that impacts local expectations about and behaviors in itself. So when we did this research, we noticed that, you know, the commodification of Eastern spiritual practice is a big part of wellness tourism. And it raises questions about intellectual property. It raises questions about ethical conduct, responsible tourism, authenticity. And when we spoke to a lot of yoga tourists about this did not rate a mention to them. What wellness tourists are solely interested in is their well-being. It's a very, you could almost say that wellness tourism and hedonism are somewhat related, right? Because I'm going to this place for my own well-being and wellness. I couldn't really care about the wider ripple effects of my being there. And so for us researchers, these are the kinds of questions that wellness tourism should raise. The link between spirituality and wellness, I think, is well pronounced, and I won't go on about that so much, apart from saying that spirituality and religion are intrinsically about wellness of a sort, you know, psychological well-being, spiritual well-being, which then links to physical well-being. My colleague Alex Norman wrote about meditation retreats and how these kinds of interventions and experiences lead to well-being benefits. And so we see this proliferating, this kind of meditation retreat tourism related to yoga tourism retreats as well. And he refers to this as self-administered well-being intervention, which is something that we embark on when we go on a wellness experience. And we also must think about wellness in terms of when we think about religious tourism in particular, that it's not just a Western concept, wellness, or a developed country concept. Many of the colleagues in this research, they talk about going on a Hajj pilgrimage or Umrah as part of this wider well-being for Islamic adherents. And so when we think about research, and I'm coming to the end of this, research on wellness and tourism, when we think about wellness, we need to think about wellness as lifestyle, wellness as landscape, wellness and culture, wellness and heritage, right? We saw before hammam tourism, onsen tourism are steeped in heritage in the countries in which they come from. We need to think about wellness tourism from a destination planning point of view. We see Bali shifting towards medical tourism, deliberately aiming to be a wellness destination. We need to think about how we market wellness. Wellness washing is something I'm writing a paper about, and it's becoming a more evident thing. Well, washing of all sorts used by marketers is obviously a tool to drive consumers from the dreaming phase to the consumption phase. Wellness and tourist behavior is a particularly important thing. In places like Bali, if you go to Ubud, there was a lot of uproar about tourists walking around Ubud in their bikinis, in a highly spiritual and religious destination. So tourist behavior becomes a really important part of that. Ethical and responsible tourism, it goes without saying that it's part of wellness tourism. The wider sustainable tourism development, as I said, in Rishikesh, the more tourists, the more yoga tourists in town, the more compromised the water supply and sewage system was becoming. Indigenous tourism, we see in the Northern Territory in Australia, that link between Aboriginal culture and nature, and then the link to wellness tourism. In a sense, when I look at something like that, my first thoughts are, that's a very extractive model of tourism, a very, I think, problematic and extractive kind of wellness tourism. Then we think about the commodification of things, the commodification of everyday cultural practice to a tourism product inevitably changes things. It will change affordability, it will change access, it will change other things like that. Authenticity, will I be able to have an authentic hammam experience in Turkey now, or has it become so shaped for tourists? I see a Disneyfied version of it. And so with that, I just want to make a few closing remarks that the nexus between wellness and sustainable tourism has myriad possibilities for interdisciplinary scholarly inquiry, for geographers, for marketers, for sociologists, for anthropologists. When we talk about wellness and sustainable tourism and its intersection, there are so many possibilities for empirical and conceptual work. And this line of inquiry is becoming more pressing as quality of life concerns intensify in the present day. And as destinations seek better quality tourists, wellness tourism inevitably offers them a way forward. And we see this in the Philippines, in Thailand, in Vietnam, in Malaysia, all reaching for that wellness tourism dollar that's highly desirable. So I think that's my last slide. So with that said, thank you all for listening to me bang on about this. I'm happy to answer any questions. And I hope that what it does, it sets a framework for all of the possibilities that the conference might offer. I know in the last conference, I remember reading one of your communiques, Desmond, there were some performance aspects of instead of presenting your paper, you could perform it, right? Maybe you're doing that again. Yeah. So anyway, thank you. I'll stop there.
Okay. Thank you so much. The theories only few, but the experience there are so many because we need the examples from different countries, yeah, with its uniqueness. Because mostly Asian countries are very different from European or American. Yeah, so that's why we are. I hope those who haven't submit their abstract, you get inspired by Professor Cheer lecture. Yeah, and then you will send your abstract and full paper soon. Now we are going to open a session, yeah, Q&A session. Who wants to start asking question? Anybody from the participant? You can raise your hand, or you can also type in the chat. Anybody? Okay, Brian Joseph, can you open your camera so that we know you? Okay, Brian, can you are still mute?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Madam Yankee. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And first of all, thank you very much for Professor Joseph. It was a great presentation. I really enjoyed the whole session. And it was a great initiative that you have taken to educate such a professional around the world about the tourism and sustainability and ecotourism, wellness tourism. It was a very, very helpful and very good points that we shared. The question that I quickly wanted to ask is, I'm actually from Sri Lanka. So we are actually also booming tourism, and I mean, we are picking it up. And then I just wanted to know South Asian part. What do you see the future of wellness tourism? Do you have any positive mindset? I mean, do you think it will pick up? And what type of advice you give for the entrepreneurs like us who was trying to join the journey of wellness?
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. That's a really interesting question. And it's before COVID, as Yankee, we used to go to Sri Lanka almost every year. Professor Suranga Silva at University of Colombo used to have an annual conference every year. And I remember the last one I went to in 2019, we were talking about Ayurveda tourism and how many tourists were going to Sri Lanka for Ayurvedic treatment. You know, they would stay for 10 to 14 days, sometimes even longer. They would then stay at the high-end resorts, or they would be those Ayurveda resorts. So I think in countries like Sri Lanka, where there are long traditions, long wellness traditions, you know, and traditions like Ayurveda, are going to be able to authentically offer something to the tourists, right? For example, if I set up an Ayurveda clinic here in Australia, it wouldn't have the same authenticity, right? It's out of place. And so I think there's, Brian, I think there's enormous potential for countries like Sri Lanka to do this. And Ranasinghe Sensei from Nara University is also here. She's also from Sri Lanka. And I think we, you know, in my talk, I also talked about the connection to gastronomy. You know, this idea that, because Ayurvedic treatment, as I understand, is about, a big part of the treatment is the what you eat, your diet, right? And so these kinds of connections between the wellness, wider wellness motivations, but also the connection to gastronomy and religion and other things like that, I think are interconnected. So yeah, I think I don't know, do we include Myanmar and South Asia? No, Myanmar is Southeast Asia, but I think those areas certainly, you know, Sri Lanka has an advantage on that, being able to develop Ayurvedic tourism and draw on a long history of doing so.
Thank you, Professor. It was.
Okay,
and also, Joseph Sensei. Sorry.
Wait. I think first we give the question, the term to Desmond, because he already raised his hand. So Nirmala, you after this you will be the one, yeah? Okay. Okay, go ahead, Desmond.
Great. Thanks very much, Joseph, for your presentation. Always very, very enlightening. No lack of theory, though. It's all embedded in your script. I'm responding to these two examples you gave of Bali. You mentioned the backpacker tourism, and at the end you mentioned the bikinis, right? I'm thinking of Ed Brunner. And one of the things
Yeah.
that Gunnar said, he said that, tourism is so much embedded into part of Balinese culture that you can even say that tourism is Balinese culture. And if we really look at the bikinis on the beach, I mean, in Ubud, you see everything there. Yeah, everything is on the beach there. And what I'm actually fascinated by recently, last year, I went to do a bit of research on Bali, and I'm actually interested in the rise of the Russians, and this is what my paper is going to be about. And what's interesting is I just basically pose a question to all the taxi drivers and tuk-tuk drivers,
Yeah.
and my own one basic question is basically, I've been to Bali 20 years ago. My sister-in-law is Balinese, so things have changed here so much, and that's all I said, right? And the next 5 minutes will be an onslaught of the Russians are invading. So, I find that particularly interesting, and relating back to what you're talking about is I see a really interesting combination of this idea of, on one hand, that what's geopolitical, geoeconomic kind of transnationalism happening, but also going back to what you mentioned about indulgence. So you have this indulgent and geopolitical movement clashing at the same time. So it becomes almost paradoxical, no? This run-in and this intersection. And that's something I got from your work. It's creating this really interesting paradox of who the Russians are and what this new Russian tourism in Bali, especially in the last 2 years, and how this is emerging. So thank you for this spaces.
You raised a very good point, but let me first say I have no objection to bikinis. If in the right,
Well,
they
that is fine.
just belong. It just depends. It belongs in a certain place, right, on the beach. But yet you raise a very important point, because the pursuit of wellness is intertwined into geopolitics and the capital movements. If you've got a ton of cash and you want to get out of where you're living, you will go to the place that offers optimum wellness.
Yeah.
And you can, and we see this happening in Bali, as you point out, where gated communities are being built, where they live quite separate from the people and place where they're in, right? So I think that's a really interesting angle for wellness, the geopolitics and the way capital flows shape the pursuit of wellness. And the term that some economic geographers use, geo-arbitrage, where you sell your house in Sydney and then you move to Bali and you can live like a king, that kind of thing. Because if you know Sydney, real estate in Sydney is just crazy.
Okay.
But good point, Desmond. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Desmond. So now we have Nirmala, and then after that we have another one will be from Trang, yeah?
Thank you very much. Thank you. I just wanted to add a comment to Joseph's answer about Sri Lanka. I also, especially since you mentioned about yoga tourism as well, I think Sri Lanka has a potential to promote spiritual tourism, especially with regard to like Buddhism and meditation. So I just thought that that's also kind of interesting part that and segment that we can promote in Sri Lanka wellness tourism.
Yeah, definitely, Nirmala, because colleagues in China and Thailand are talking about Buddhist tourism as a kind of topic for scaling up research, and when they talk about destinations that fit this Buddhist tourism model, Sri Lanka is one of the key ones. Sri Lanka, India, Thailand, Myanmar, and so on. So definitely, is Buddhist tourism about wellness? I think it is. The cultural triangle there in Sri Lanka, heritage, culture, landscapes, it's all intertwined. And the more you look at people and places and their heritage, there is inevitably a kind of wellness element floating around in there. Because why do we travel, right? We travel to be rejuvenated and to recover from the rigors of the everyday work, and we go on holidays to recharge. Really, that's all about wellness, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's very interesting that you talk about cultural, how we can link even cultural tourism to wellness tourism, because I think that in any country, any destination, we have those things like different kind of like tourism forms that we can connect to wellness tourism.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for the
Thank you
comment.
for your wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Nirmala. And then now we go to Trang. Trang, can you show yourself? Or do you don't want to show yourself? I will read.
Can I ask?
Wait, Trang, I will just read his what he wrote. Yeah, I am from Vietnam. In my country, wellness tourism considered as healing tourism that is not appreciated highly by researchers. Do you have any ideas about this case?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's Vo or Trung. Recently, the Asian Development Bank was talking about developing hot spring tourism up in the north, in the hills. I think near Ninh Binh somewhere. They said there are some hot springs up there, but they've not been developed specifically for tourism. So they've seen the popularity of hot spring tourism in Japan and elsewhere. And so I think that's one area that that's looking to develop. Nirmala's comment about Buddhist tourism before is another. And I mean the intertwining links between gastronomy, landscapes, culture, heritage, religion, I think are all intertwined. And Vietnam would be really well positioned for something like that. I would say, yeah, it would be an interesting aspect for you to present at the conference.
Okay. So wait a minute, yeah, Madhuri, because Piotr, yeah, he has also a question, but he cannot show himself. He has out. So I will just read it for him. Thinking about various aspects of wellness, should cannabis tourism or mushroom tourism be considered wellness tourism? What is your opinion on this? Sorry, he cannot open, but he said that. So interesting speech. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. We see countries like Thailand embracing this kind of touristic activity. And at the same time, we see Amsterdam withdrawing from it, or making it harder to partake in. So I think it's an interesting strategy for Thailand to make cannabis legal and freely available in cafes. It's almost, maybe I'm exaggerating this, but it almost seems like the antithesis of Thai culture to have this kind of tourism. But maybe not. Pietro, it's a really interesting question, because will other destinations see what Thailand is doing and decide to follow suit? I doubt it very much. I think it, yeah, I think it's a really interesting development to be watching. I don't imagine other destinations like Indonesia doing that, because that just goes against fundamental principles. Would you see Vietnam doing that? I doubt that very much. But Thailand has, and it seemingly works for Thailand. Have they experienced more tourists as a result of that? I don't think that's convincing. So if it was about developing more tourism, then perhaps it hasn't. If it's about focusing on high-end, high-quality tourism, is that something that motivates high-quality tourists to visit a destination, having cannabis and mushrooms available? I don't know, but it's a really interesting question to tease out and see. I wish someone would do this research in Thailand. It would be very interesting. Thank you, Pedro.
Okay, now I go to Januska. Do you want to say by yourself, Januska? Are you still
Yes, I can.
here?
Can you hear me?
Okay, thank you. Sure, yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you, Joseph, for your great presentation. And it had me thinking a lot about this tension between tourists and residents, right? But a group that you haven't touched on is domestic tourists. So in my own work, right, I see this that how people relate or react to tourists has a different connotation if it's a domestic tourist, because they seem to know how to engage in the local practices. But at the same time, it is also a commodification for domestic tourists. Kyoto #1 visitor is a Japanese visitor. So my thought then was like, if we talk about the sustainability idea of wellness tourism at this tension point, what are your thoughts there on domestic tourists?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And full disclosure, Januska's just published a paper on this in my journal, Tourism Geographies, on this very issue of domestic tourists reactions as opposed to international tourists. Because when we talk about tourism impacts, you're right. International tourists and domestic tourists can have quite distinctive impacts on the destination. I think, speaking generally, you would have to say that domestic tourists blend into the destination much easier. Let's say if you had, without picking out tourists from a different country, sometimes tourists from a different country stand out more than the domestic tourists. They have different behaviors, different intensity of the volume and other things like that. So yeah, I think Desmond prefaced this before in his question about Bali and how there's a rise of Russian tourists, not just tourists but almost permanent residents, right? And how this creates this kind of imbalance in the social kind of structure. So I think it's a really important question, because in countries like China, India, Japan, domestic tourism was worth far more than international tourism. Yet much of the emphasis is always placed on international tourists. Whenever you hear National Tourist Office talk, that was, we got 1 million international tourists this year. Never mind the 25 million local tourists and their spending, which is usually local, and their ability to blend in and understand social and cultural norms is better. So I think it's a really interesting question. I look forward to the next part of your research, Januska.
Okay, thank you.
Yankee, can
Now,
I
I
ask?
think, Doctor, wait a minute, because the chat, you can do it when you close the section, Madhuri, sorry. Because there is still a question in the chat, Birgit.
Right, yes, Yankee. Thank you very much, Joseph, again for your presentation. And this whole topic is very close to my heart, as I said to you. I'm not a geographer, as you know. I'm a social scientist and a social psychologist with a positive psychology, very strong leaning, and coming from a leisure background. So leisure to me was recreation, rejuvenation, now a new term, wellness. And wellness, as you say, and tourism is a microcosm of society. So yes, we are looking at the reflection of what happens to society. And what does tourism do is commodify it, as you just said. Interesting notion, we're talking about spiritual and tourism and meditation, which is so popular in Buddhist tourism. Now, there's an outcry by Buddhists about the, as they call it, mindfulness happening in society, about meditation and all of that spiritual aspect that has now been so popular in society. And I think tourism is just taking that and again putting it into the tourism context and commodifying that notion. And it's, so there is that thing that we sometimes need to be cautious of, what tourism actually does. I sat in a Bali conference and I was moderating that one. and people were presenting about those sort of issues that were brought up about Bali. And I said, the danger is there, that commodifying and selling their spiritual essence for the sake of tourism. What's your view on that one? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really sticky topic. It's the same thing as, you know, to what extent do we promote tourist visitation to cathedrals, temples, and the like, right? Places of worship are becoming places for tourist spectatorship, and you know, places of worship are becoming tourist spectacles. Yeah, it's I think it raises a lot of contestations, especially for those who are traditional and adherents to the religion, and those who are more welcoming of outsiders coming in. And then we see, you know, how, for example, Januszka who's here will know that in Japan during COVID, a destination like Kyoto, that people go to a lot to visit the temples and shrines and other things, Kyoto was in a very bad state. The city was bankrupt, right? And the city ended up asking the shrines and temples, the administrative organizations, can you please start paying tax or help us financially? Because when tourists go to Kyoto, they donate a lot of money to the temples, but extent to which the temples develop and help manage tourism was a point of frustration for the city. So yeah, I think when we commodify things that are of either religious or cultural practice for a particular, you know, group of people, and then suddenly it becomes for sale to the highest bidder, if as it were, like the stuff what I was talking about in the Northern Territory, how we're saying to Aboriginal community, okay, we will involve you now in wellness tourism for tourists. We will make them feel better about themselves. We will increase their health and well-being. Yet, for many Indigenous communities in Australia, their well-being is often at the bottom of the socioeconomic, you know, it's
yeah. What I'm probably also referring to, Januszka made the point, is the tourist behaviour in regards to that domestic and international. And we're looking at the respect component, and I think that's where it shifts. Now I'm looking at relational components, how people relate to each other, and the respect component. And we're talking about over-tourism. Where do you set the boundaries? Where do you set the limits? We're talking about carrying capacity, limits of acceptable change, all of that, right? You know, that's, yeah.
The
Big
local
topic,
tourist distinction is really important. It reminds me of, you know, a student of mine's doing research in Bali, and there was this issue about compliance to laws in Bali. You know, international tourists were flouting the laws, and one of the comments, when it came to wearing helmets on their motorbikes, right? And someone said, well, the tourist said, why should we wear helmets when all the local people don't wear helmets? You know, it made me think of your proposition that locals are more compliant and more respectful of the place. But that's a trivial example. Certainly within temples and other places like that, I would say Balinese are more respectful of the place they're in because they know it. They're familiar with the culture, the place and their culture of the temple, as opposed to a tourist who might just see it as an Instagrammable location.
Yeah, and just to finish off, having lived in Dubai, of course, and worked there, and again, purely working with Emirati, I know the conflict with tourists. And, you know, Dubai, they're very strict on tourist behavior.
Yes.
Let me assure you, and even locals and tourists will actually say, excuse me, you're not supposed to run around like that. So it's again setting the boundaries and limits. So it comes back to whoever's in charge of it, you know, from a management point of view, I guess. Anyway, fascinating coming from a geography perspective. Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you
Birgit.
very much, Dr. Birgit. There is the follow-up question from Trong, that he said that, thank you. Could you have any suggestion about wellness model of tourism in Vietnam that could compete to other countries in Southeast Asia?
Oh, yeah. I think that we should discuss that at the conference. That's a big question. So if you come to the conference and present a paper, we can have a Maybe we can do a theme session or something on that particular topic, because it's a very interesting topic. You know, does Vietnam try to copy what all of the other countries doing, or does it look to within and say, you know, what is particular about Vietnam that we might be able to shape into, you know, into a wellness tourist experience? I think all the ingredients are there, right? Landscapes, the religious aspects, the heritage. Yeah.
Okay, so there's one more from Novita. She can't open her camera because she's driving. He said that, hi, Professor Joseph. If you know Sikire are shamans or traditional healers from the Mentawai tribe of West Sumatra, Indonesia, who have an important role in the spiritual life and health of the community. How does this compare with tribes in other Asian regions? How to develop it so that it becomes a type of wellness tourism that is popular with tourists?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. You know, often in the literature on justice and tourism, they talk about agency of local people to make their own decisions about what happens with their culture. And I would say it's a really that would probably be the best place to start. You know, for us is, you know, for tourism marketers to sit back and say, hey, you guys, you have something very interesting there. Let's present that for tourism. I think, you know, who should be able to dictate what's done with a culture for tourism? You know, we hear a lot of cases where the National Tourist Authority will just go and recreate these cultural practices somewhere else. You know, and it makes me, your question makes me think of in Fiji, kava. Kava is a local kind of I wouldn't call it alcohol, but it's a drink used for ceremonial purposes, but it's also now used for medicinal purposes for people to relax. Like if you suffer from insomnia, many of the treatments for insomnia relate to having kava. You drink kava, it relaxes you. Not as hallucinogenic like ayahuasca is, but you see, for a long time, medical laboratories were going to places like the Amazon, to the Pacific Islands, to the highlands of Papua New Guinea, to find all of these, you know, all of these ingredients that can help develop the treatments that they use. So I think when it comes to the tribes of West Sumatra or anywhere else, the question has to be, you know, is this what they want to do? And if they say, yes, we would like to commodify our rituals and practices for tourists and for tourism income, then, you know, the point that needs to be made is that inevitably tourism transforms people and places. I don't think you can say, let's embark on tourism and things will stay the same. It introduces some form of change. And you know, some would say that, you know, perhaps change is normal. Change is part of progress. We can't stand still, right? We can't have culture standing still. But many heritage practitioners who are very strict on this idea of not compromising heritage and culture will say, you know, tourism perhaps, you mentioned Edward Brunner before, Desmond, he talked a lot about the demonstration effect in his work and how, you know, tourists in the place. Some of you might know there was a documentary that I used to use in my classes called Cannibal Tours. It's a very famous kind of exemplar for tourists and hosts and guests meeting in this very strange encounter and the impacts of that meeting. I think inevitably when you bring these people together and you make these changes, some transformation is likely. Yeah.
Okay, I think there's no more questions in the chat. So now, Madhuri, you want to ask question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask. It's very late, I understand. I think we can keep this. I'll ask. My question is like, what is your say or comment on twinning smartness and wellness tourism? How do
Say that
we
again.
what is the role of technology? It should be there
Oh,
or not?
oh.
What is your
Yeah,
comment? You understand? What is your comment on the twinning, smartness, and wellness tourism? We
yeah,
can discuss here, or I'm coming to Bali, we can discuss over there.
you know, it's an interesting one, right? Because these days, if you don't have an app on your telephone or on your watch that relates to something like your fitness, how many kilometers you've walked, or whatever, so if we think about wellness tourism and technology, um, there are quite a number of considerations. For example, can we have virtual wellness tourism, for example? During the pandemic, we had those kinds of things. Januszka will tell you that people would go and
I
film.
didn't go through any research papers as such on this topic, so that is
Yeah,
the reason.
yeah. So virtual wellness experiences is one avenue for this discussion. The use of technology to help tourists in a way calibrate the wellness benefits of what they're doing. Like many of you probably would look at your watch, your Apple Watch or your phone to see how many kilometers you've walked today, how many calories you burn, and that kind of thing, right? So perhaps technology can play an impact, a part of that. I think
I think how the stakeholders can plan policies
yeah,
relating to smartness. That could also be
yeah,
a
yeah, yeah,
point of discussion in Bali, right?
yeah. I think if it comes to the management of wellness tourism, that could be something in terms of, being able to use technology to manage crowds in places like temples and shrines and other places like that. That could be a management tool for that. Whether it's a tool that the wellness tourists can use, and are there any wellness benefits from the intersection
Benefits.
of technology and wellness? My first instincts are probably not, because if I go on a yoga tourism retreat, it's all analog, right? I'm not, if I go to a temple, it's an analog experience. If I go on a Ayurveda,
Technology should not be a part, right? Your comment is technology is not a very good thing to be applied in wellness tourism.
I don't know, maybe I think it will take some thinking. We have to
Yes.
ask Dimitrios Bohalis about this.
Okay. I think thank you so much. This was the last question. So I request Kevsar to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you. On behalf of Euro-Asia Tourism Studies Association, I would like to express our profound gratitude to Professor Joseph Scheer for delivering such a compelling and thought-provoking presentation. Actually, Professor, your insights into the evolving dynamics of wellness and sustainability tourism have not only shed light on critical trends, but have also encouraged us to think deeply about the transformative power of tourism in fostering well-being, mindfulness, and sustainable future. You can understand this from the questions. There are many questions here after the session, and I hope we will continue discussing all these important issues in our next conference in Bali this June. And the shift from traditional tourism models of sun, sand, and sea to a focus on spirituality and wellness represents more than a trend. I think it signals a profound cultural transformation in how we view travel and its purpose. And Professor Scheer, your expertise has illuminated the practical implications of these changes for industry professionals and these youth researchers in our group as well, setting the stage for meaningful discussions, maybe meaningful research that we are going to listen in Bali conference as well, because it's a great inspiration for them to decide about their next topic maybe to discuss. So I also would like to thank to dear Dr. Yanki and the EATSA board for their contribution in the organization of this webinar. We are organizing this as part of the Bali conference. We would like to promote it. And also I would like to give a brief information for those who may be new to our community. allow me to briefly introduce EATSA. We are much more than an academic organization. We see generally ourselves as a bridge between Asia and Europe, bringing together scholars, industry professionals, and practitioners in the fields of tourism and hospitality. And as EATSA, we believe that tourism is more than just an economic activity. It is a powerful tool for fostering cross-cultural understanding, inclusivity, and peace that we really need desperately more than any previous time. So our mission is to advance collaborative research, innovative practices, and meaningful dialogue, creating positive change also in the tourism landscape. So in line with our commitment, promoting tourism as a catalyst for peace, this year's Bali conference focus on wellness and sustainability aligns perfectly with our vision. As highlighted by Professor Cheer and supported by recent research, tourism has the potential to address pressing global challenges, including social exclusion, inequality, and the need for sustainable development. So, looking ahead, we are delighted to invite all of you to join us at this 2025 EATSA conference, which will take place in the beautiful and culturally rich island of Bali from 23rd June to 27. And our dearest colleague and member of EATSA, Dr. Yanki, as the host and as part of the organizing committee, is preparing a really authentic and amazing conference. So we just really want to see all of you in this conference and the ones who are going to listen our recording also later. So it is an opportunity to foster meaningful connections, share innovative solutions, and engage in transformative conversations that have the power to shape the future of tourism in this conference. So whether you are a seasoned member of EATSA or joining us for the first time, we welcome you to be part of this vibrant community and this important dialogue. So once again, thank you, Professor Cheer, for your remarkable contribution today. And thank you to all of your participants for your engagement and enthusiasm. So we look forward to seeing all of you in Bali. Until then, stay inspired, stay connected, and let's keep building bridges through tourism. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.